Some mornings, the quiet in my car felt heavier than traffic. That day was no different, until everything changed. The roads through Pasadena were lined with jacaranda trees still waking up from their bloom. I was on my way to work, just a little later than usual. The sky was that dull kind of gray that made you forget what season it was. I adjusted the rearview mirror, half listening to the local radio, half lost in thought. Ever since my father passed, the silence between my sister and me had stretched like a tightrope. And me? I was still trying to walk it, even if it led nowhere. I don't remember the sound of the crash, just the feel of my body snapping to the side like a rag doll, the crunch of glass, and then that terrifying stillness. A Civic had run the red light, slammed into my driver's side. They told me later it was instant. But in my head, the seconds crawled. It was like time folded itself in grief. When I came to, I wasn't sure if I was awake or dreaming. The fluorescent lights above me hummed, distant and cold. A nurse was pressing something against my head. My arm, my left arm, felt like it belonged to someone else. There was blood in my mouth, metallic, bitter. My ears caught snippets of chatter. BP's low, get imaging. Someone asked my name, and I struggled to answer. Reet Jurvetson. My voice didn't sound like mine. We need an emergency contact, another voice said. Anyone we can call? I hesitated. My phone wasn't with me. I couldn't remember my sister's number by heart, not that she would have answered anyway. The only number I did know, Bobby's, was from a time when I used to trust people like him. My brother-in-law, I croaked. Bobby Taylor. They jotted it down. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. My head throbbed, and every breath felt like it pulled from some bruised place in my chest. Eventually, a nurse returned. She looked at me like she didn't know how to say it. He responded to the message, she said softly. Just one word. Okay. Nothing else. No. I'm on my way. No. Is she stable? Not even a question mark. For a second, I thought I misheard. Just, okay? I repeated. She nodded. That's all. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. But mostly, I felt numb. Bobby and I were never close. He married my sister right before my dad got sick. They were the type of couple who hosted elaborate dinners for friends but forgot birthdays. Still, there were moments, small ones, that made me think he might show up when it mattered. He once offered to drive me to a job interview when my car battery died. He always said, family looks out for each other, usually when others were listening. Maybe that was the clue I missed. I asked for my phone. My fingers trembled as I typed. The message I sent was straightforward. I was in a car accident. I'm at St. Mary's, broken arm, possible concussion. Can you come get me? His reply came minutes later. Okay. Not even a hang in there. Just, okay. That word didn't just sting. It split me open. People say moments of crisis reveal character. I'd say they expose what people were always willing to hide. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to change. It didn't. In that sterile room filled with the beeps of machines and the soft shuffle of nurses, I felt a shift. Not in my body, but in my sense of family. My emergency contact had responded like I was an inconvenience. My sister didn't call. No text. No message. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she didn't even know. But deep down, I knew she knew. She always had bigger things going on. Bigger than me. As I lay there, one arm strapped and the other gripping my phone, I realized there was no one else I could call. No parent to show up. No friend close enough. Just me, broken in more ways than I had counted. But then something happened. A kind of clarity. Painkillers numbed my physical pain, but not the truth forming inside me. I stared at the word okay again, and this time I took a screenshot. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but I knew it mattered. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Instead, I felt this quiet certainty building, like the kind you feel when the door locks behind you and you decide not to look back. If you're not family when I'm broken, I whispered aloud, you're not family at all. My hand hovered over the contact list again, but I didn't call Bobby. I called someone else. No one came. The machines around me beeped with mechanical indifference, their rhythm more consistent than the people I once called family. I sat upright, cradling my arm in a stiff foam sling, the IV tape on my other wrist pulling slightly every time I adjusted in the plastic chair. I was still in my ER gown, but they'd moved me from a bed to the waiting area after tests confirmed I wasn't bleeding internally. "You're stable," they said. "Sure. My body, maybe." The nurse approached again, her tone softer this time, like she knew I wasn't surprised anymore. We tried the contact again. Still no response. "No one's coming." I just nodded. There wasn't anything else to say. For a moment, I wanted to rationalize it. Maybe Bobby got caught up in something. Maybe my sister didn't see the message. But no, that one-word reply. Okay. It wasn't confusion. It was choice. The silence now felt strategic. When I stood, no one offered to help. I didn't ask. I signed the discharge paperwork with shaky fingers, thanked the nurse, and ordered a ride on my phone. My screen was still cracked from the crash, but it worked well enough. The Uber pulled up 5 minutes later. A silver Camry, clean inside, smelling faintly of pine-scented air freshener and fast food. The driver was a chatty guy, mid-40s, name tag said Ron. He smiled too much. I hated that I noticed. "You all right there?" he asked as I buckled in with difficulty. "Rough morning," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. He chuckled awkwardly. "Well, hey, you're vertical in breathing. That's already a win today." I didn't respond. My mind was busy rerunning the nurse's words like they were lines in a bad play I'd already seen too many times. As we merged onto the main road, Ron answered a call on speaker without warning. "Yeah, hey, I'm with a rider, but go ahead." A woman's voice came through. Light, casual. She was laughing. "She's alive." Damn, that's going to complicate things. I froze. I knew that voice. No hesitation. My spine stiffened, not from pain, but from recognition so sharp it cut through me. It was my sister. Ron fumbled for the speaker button. "Sorry, thought that was something else." I waved him off, staring ahead through the windshield. I didn't say a word. She hadn't known I was in the car, which meant she wasn't talking to me. She was talking about me, and she'd assumed, hoped, I wasn't going to make it. They didn't just forget me at the hospital. They were making plans in my absence. My head tilted slightly, but my face remained blank. There was nothing left to say. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen. Still working. I opened the Uber app and bookmarked the trip. Dashcams are common now. If there was audio, I'd have it. Not because I needed proof for anyone else, but because I refused to let that sentence fade into memory. "She's alive." Damn, that's going to complicate things. The ride felt longer than it was. Every street we passed held memories I didn't want. The cafe my dad used to like. The gas station where I cried in my car the day he went into hospice. A park bench where I sat once, waiting for someone who never showed. By the time we turned onto my block, I wasn't thinking about hospitals or broken bones anymore. I was thinking about patterns, all the birthdays that had slipped by unnoticed, the family group chats I was somehow never added to, the slideshow at Dad's funeral where I was in one photo, cropped at the shoulder. I was being erased. Not in one sweep, but in pieces, small, silent pieces. And I almost didn't notice until there was barely anything left of me in their version of the story. When Ron stopped the car, I thanked him quietly, stepped out, and stood in front of my building for a second before heading in. Inside my apartment, the quiet hit me harder than it did in the ER. I moved slowly, placing my bag on the kitchen counter, turning on a lamp in the corner to avoid the harsh overhead light. Then I sank onto the couch. I scrolled through my old texts, things I hadn't looked at in months, my messages to my sister last Christmas. "Want to do something low-key?" Left on read. My birthday invite 2 years ago. "Dinner on me?" No response. The time I told her I got a promotion, she responded with a meme about wine. It all played back like a pattern I had refused to accept. They didn't forget me. They dismissed me. They minimized everything until I believed them. Until I believed I was optional. I opened the Notes app on my phone. Title, Plan A. And under it, one name, Peaches. Not because she owed me anything, but because she was the only one who ever looked at me like I might still matter. I whispered to the room. It wasn't the accident that broke me. It was the silence after. When I got back to my apartment, everything looked the same. That was the part that broke me a little. How unchanged the world was after something inside me had cracked in half. The hallway light still flickered like always. My mail was still half stuck in the slot, junk and bills mostly. My living room smelled faintly of lavender cleaner, like I'd expected myself back without realizing how much I'd changed in the past 6 hours. I dropped my bag on the counter with my good hand and sat for a moment, staring at nothing in particular. Then I moved toward the closet near the heater, the one I hadn't opened in months. A cardboard box was shoved behind an old laundry basket, marked in black Sharpie. Dad, final items. My sister had told me it was just scraps. Paper stuff, she'd said when she dropped it off. Nothing important, junk. Funny how people define value when they're hiding something. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged on the carpet, and started going through it. Envelopes. A worn notebook. A couple of postcards I'd sent him from trips years ago that he'd kept for some reason. I smiled, and then frowned. At the bottom, wrapped in a yellowed grocery bag, was a dusty picture frame. An old one, our family portrait from when I was maybe 10. Dad had his arm around me. Mom looked like she wasn't fully there even then. My sister stood front and center, grinning like she was already planning her escape. When I lifted the backing from the frame to clean it, something caught. Tucked behind the photo was a folded envelope. My heart slowed. It was addressed in my father's handwriting. To me. "If you're reading this," the note began, "it means someone didn't want you to." My hands trembled. I unfolded the paper inside. The ink was slightly faded, the corners crisp. It was a will, a handwritten will, dated 2 years before he died. In it, he left the house to me. No ambiguity, no shared ownership, no percentages. He wanted me to have it, fully. I sat back against the couch, the frame resting beside me on the floor like a monument. My breathing had shifted, shallower, sharper. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I had just been cut out. I took a deep breath and stood up. I made a copy of the will with my home scanner, sealed the original in a fireproof box, and locked it under the bed. Then I pulled out my laptop. Pasadena County public records aren't hard to access. I searched the property. The transfer had been made just 6 days after the funeral. Deed changed. My sister's name added. Mine never mentioned. No court process. No hearing. Just a quiet shuffle of papers while I was still picking out the flowers for his memorial. I stared at the screen. The devil doesn't come dressed in red. He comes with paperwork. And sometimes a smile and a casserole dish. I grabbed my phone and typed out a message to Bobby. Found something of Dad's. "You and my sister might want to talk to me." The 3 dots popped up immediately. Then came his reply. "We were hoping this wouldn't come up again. She said you'd be too emotional to dig." Not confused, not surprised, just confirming what I'd now realized. They knew. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a plan. The rage didn't come all at once. It was slow, measured, like boiling water. I leaned against the counter, staring out the window as if something out there might make more sense than what was unfolding inside my chest. All those years I'd given them grace, all the excuses I'd made. "She's just busy." He didn't mean it like that. They're dealing with a lot. I opened the manila folder where I kept old documents from Dad. Inside was another note I hadn't noticed before, stuck on the back of a page with an old property map. It said, in his shaky handwriting, "Don't let them rewrite this." I whispered to the room. They already did. But not for long. I moved like someone possessed, pulled out the printer, loaded paper, uploaded the scanned will to the cloud, created a private folder, encrypted. Then I printed 5 copies. 5 manila envelopes. I didn't sign them. Didn't write anything at all. The contents would speak louder than anything I could ever say. I placed them carefully on the kitchen counter. The next move wouldn't be silence. The text came on a Thursday morning, just as I was reheating leftover soup and wondering how long I could survive on canned things before venturing into the world again. "Let's all talk this through. Sunday, 5 p.m. It was from my sister. No context, No apology. No hint of the storm she knew I was already standing in. I stared at it for a full minute, then typed back 2 words. I'll come. Because of course I would. They were expecting the version of me that flinched when called dramatic. The girl who apologized for existing too loudly. The one who let them sit in the driver's seat while they rewrote history in cursive on funeral napkins. But I had changed. Sunday came. I wore all black, not for them, but for clarity. I stood outside my sister's house a few minutes before 5, manila envelopes tucked neatly inside my bag, one for each person sitting on the other side of the living room. They'd arranged the chairs like some kind of tribunal. Bobby sat with his legs crossed, sipping something that looked suspiciously expensive for a man who claimed they were just scraping by. 2 aunts were there, 1 cousin who flew in for the weekend, and my sister, at the center, of course, always. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice syrupy but sharp. "We just wanted to have a calm, open conversation, clear the air." Bobby nodded like a sidekick. "No judgment here. We all just want peace." I took the far seat, the one closest to the front door. My bag stayed in my lap. "You know I found Dad's original will," I said calmly. That was my opening shot. The room stiffened. 1 aunt blinked too fast. The cousin glanced sideways. Bobby's mouth tightened. My sister only smiled, like a host managing an unruly guest at brunch. "We were all just trying to do what's best for the family," she said. "It wasn't personal." "Changing the deed 6 days after the funeral wasn't personal?" I asked. Silence. She tried again. "You were grieving, and honestly, you've been distant for a long time, Reet. We weren't sure you'd even want the house. Gaslight, spark, fume. Gaslighting is only effective when everyone else keeps the lights dim," I said, locking eyes with her. The cousin spoke up timidly. "I thought Reet lived out of state." "No," I replied. "I've lived 10 minutes away this whole time. But nice try." 1 aunt coughed into her hand. Another looked down at her lap. Then the moment cracked. "Well," the older aunt said without thinking, "she did say years ago she'd make sure that house stayed out of your hands." A pause, a silence so dense it pressed against my ears. My sister didn't look shocked. She looked furious. At the aunt, not at the words. Bobby jumped in too late. "That's not exactly what was meant." I stood, slowly. "What you tried to erase, I recovered," I said, pulling the manila envelopes from my bag. "What you tried to hide, I documented. I placed each envelope on the coffee table, neatly, like closing a deal. This is not a threat, it's a correction." I didn't wait for questions. They wouldn't ask any. Not now. Not while their guilt was still crawling across their faces like a slow leak. I walked toward the front door. My sister called after me. "Reet, you're overreacting." But it was weak. Hollow. I turned back only once. "Next time you invite me here," I said, "try not to stage it like a tribunal. And next time, I won't come alone." Then I left. The first name on my list was already waiting in the parking lot. I replayed the audio for the 4th time that morning. Not because I needed to hear it again, I already knew the words, but because I wanted to memorize the tone, the inflection, the ease with which Bobby had said it like he was discussing the weather. "We thought she wouldn't dig this deep." That was it. 10 words. But they gutted any lingering doubt. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't oversight. It was strategy. Cold, calculated, and arrogantly lazy. Like they assumed I'd just roll over and let them draw a chalk outline around my rights. I clipped the file, saved it under the name Intentional Disinheritance, and sent it to myself. Then to 3 others. A former paralegal friend in Culver City, a cousin I trusted more than anyone in that living room last Sunday, and a cloud backup I had recently upgraded with 2-factor authentication. My coffee had gone cold. I drank it anyway. Bitterness felt appropriate. "Proof is quiet," I whispered to myself. Lies are loud. By 10:30, I was sitting across from Peaches Jackson in a cafe downtown that served overpriced tea and lemon scones shaped like California. She looked exactly the same as she had in high school, sharp, composed, and always a few steps ahead of everyone else. Her eyes skimmed the documents without saying a word for nearly 10 minutes. I watched her the way prey watches a predator it's about to hire. She set the pages down, folded her hands over the table, and asked, "Do you want this handled publicly or permanently?" "I want it done smart," I said. She nodded once. Then we start quiet. We spent the next hour drafting what she called a diplomatic threat, a letter of intent addressed to my sister Bobby and the notary involved in the property transfer. Peaches's language was surgical, formal, firm, and soaked in consequence. "If we don't receive acknowledgement of error and reinstatement of ownership rights within 10 business days," she wrote, "we will proceed with civil litigation. All materials will be introduced into public record." I added a line at the end, my voice cracking slightly as I said it. "This isn't about fairness anymore. It's about correction." Peaches looked at me for a moment, then she added it, verbatim. By the time I returned home, the sun was beginning its descent. The golden hour bled through my blinds like warmth I didn't trust yet. I pulled out the accordion folder of my father's paperwork and began flipping. Receipts, notes, a utility bill from 3 years ago. Then I found it. A yellowed invoice from a plumbing repair service with my father's neat handwriting at the bottom. Reed should handle all house-related matters, final. It wasn't notarized, but it was his words, a man who chose his words like they were currency. I added it to the growing folder of ammunition. And I didn't cry, I didn't gloat. I did what I always do. I got organized. Then my phone buzzed. "Peaches, it's been delivered. Let's see how they react." I sat on the edge of my couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. They thought I'd sit this one out. They thought I'd break. They thought a paper cut wouldn't bleed. "I'm not waiting anymore," I said aloud, each word a hammer. "I'm coming for what's mine." The envelopes didn't tremble in my hand, but my fingers did. 5 of them, lined up neatly on the counter, sealed and unmarked. Each held a copy of the will, a photo of me and Dad in front of the house, and his note in his own handwriting. "Don't let them rewrite this." It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't desperation. It was documentation. It was truth, finally in the open. I slid them into my tote, pulled on my coat, and walked to the nearest drop box. My pace was even, my jaw tight. Not a single part of me expected a phone call or an apology. That wasn't the point. You don't scream when you're holding evidence. You simply send it. The sound of each envelope hitting the bottom of the metal bin was more satisfying than I expected. Not loud, not theatrical, just final. After that, I headed downtown. The city clerk's office was housed in an aging government building that smelled like paper and cheap disinfectant. The woman at the records counter wore glasses too big for her face and looked at me like I was another chore, but she helped. "I'm looking for the notarized deed transfer of 1048 Rose Hill Drive," I said. She typed for a moment, then printed the form and slid it toward me. As I examined the document, my stomach turned. The signature on the transfer, the one labeled as my father's, looked off. The shape was close, but the slant, the spacing, the pressure... I'd seen enough of his handwriting to know that this wasn't it. I pulled out a copy of his last tax return. The signature on that was crisp, confident, familiar. The difference was obvious. And worse, it was laughable. The clerk leaned over, just slightly. "This doesn't look like a match," she said under her breath. I nodded. "Is there a process for contesting this?" She handed me a form, stapled to a checklist. "File a formal request for document review. If you're alleging forgery, it gets escalated." And so I did. Right there, right then, I left the building with something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. 2 days later, a police officer knocked on my door, Detective Martinez. His voice was calm, careful, but the message was clear. "There were inconsistencies," he said. "We had the document analyzed. The signature doesn't match authenticated samples of your father's handwriting. You'll want to move forward through civil channels, but if anything further comes to light, we may be looking at fraud." He paused. "You should know, this doesn't happen often, but when it does, people usually assume they won't get caught because it's family." I nodded. That's exactly why they did it. After he left, I stood at my kitchen table, staring down at the pile of evidence I'd started to call the folder: will, receipts, Dad's notes, and now, official word from law enforcement. My phone buzzed. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen since the day I left that living room tribunal: my sister. I let it ring once, twice. I picked up on the third, but said nothing. "Reet," she said quickly, like she hadn't rehearsed it but still wanted it to land. "We didn't know the lawyer made a mistake." "Stop!" My voice came out clear and flat. "You knew. You just didn't think I would." A long pause. Then, "This doesn't have to become a circus. You turned it into one the day you forged his name," I said. "I'm just the woman selling tickets." She hung up, and I didn't feel sad. I didn't even feel angry. I felt ready. That night, I sat at the table again and laid out every piece one by one, like a puzzle finally taking shape after years of missing corners. The photo of me and Dad went in the center. They thought paper would silence me. Now it was the loudest thing I had. It started with a message, just a line from my cousin Kelly. "I didn't know what they called you behind your back." I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "What do you mean?" She didn't reply with words, just a screenshot, group chat. My sister, Bobby. A few of the same family members who sat in that living room and nodded while I laid out my father's will. There, next to my name, was the word they'd been using: the liability. Not once, not in passing, repeated, tagged, quoted like it was some kind of inside joke. "She's just a liability anyway. Don't loop her in, too many feelings, total liability." My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't anger at first, it was disbelief, like seeing your name carved into something without your permission, like a bruise you didn't know you had until someone pressed on it. They hadn't just excluded me from family decisions, they branded me. I sat back on the couch and let the silence settle. The audacity. The cruelty cloaked in sarcasm. How easy it must have been for them, handing around that label like it was a party favor. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to push it out of my body, but it stayed. Something pulled me toward the hallway closet, the one where I kept boxes I hadn't opened in years. One was labeled Dad, Miss. I pulled it down, slid the lid off, and there it was, a birthday card, still sealed. My name written in his handwriting on the front. I remembered asking about it once. My sister said he forgot to give it to me, and later she said she lost it. Liar. I opened it slowly. Inside, his words, scribbled in blue ink, a little shaky but unmistakably him. "You're not an obligation, Reet. You're my daughter. Always." I sat on the floor with the card open in my lap. My eyes didn't sting. This time it wasn't sadness. It was steel. It was knowing. Every word they'd said behind my back, every name they'd given me that wasn't mine, fell apart in the presence of my father's truth. I didn't yell. I didn't rant. Instead, I logged into an old blog I hadn't touched in years, wiped it clean. New title. Erased, but not deleted. I wrote, slowly at first, then faster. I didn't name names. I didn't call out specific people. But I let the silence break. I shared the story, my father's will, the forged document, the card, the phrase, the liability, without saying who said it. Just that it was said, and that it mattered. It wasn't viral. It wasn't trending. But it moved. Within days, messages started to roll in. People I hadn't heard from in years. My dad's old friend from the community center. A neighbor who used to wave every Sunday from across the street. A woman from his church who wrote, "I always wondered why you weren't at the reading. Now I understand." And from others, quiet, brave words. "I believe you. We saw it too. You deserved better." I didn't need applause. I needed acknowledgement. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was getting it. Not because I demanded it, but because I told the truth and let people decide for themselves. And then came the email. From a local newsletter editor. "We'd love to feature your story. It's rare to see someone stand firm without burning the whole world down." I wrote back, "Happy to talk." That evening, I sat on my balcony, sipping tea that had long gone cold, watching the lights flicker on across the neighborhood. They called me the liability. Let's see how they deal with me becoming the headline. The invitation came on Wednesday, though it wasn't worded like one. We're all getting dinner Friday night at La Quercia. Thought it might be good to just clear the air. That last part was the giveaway. My sister didn't do apologies. She staged them. La Quercia was our dad's favorite spot. Leather booths, heavy silverware, waitstaff who remembered your name and wine preference. The kind of place he'd save for birthdays or hard-won promotions. The choice wasn't accidental. This wasn't dinner. It was a scene, a performance. And I was expected to play my old role, silent, small, manageable. I arrived 2 minutes early and alone, wearing a navy wrap dress and the kind of earrings you wear when you want to be remembered but not pitied. They were already seated. Bobby greeted me with that politician smile, the one that said nothing but showed teeth. My sister waved like we hadn't spoken through lawyers. 2 of our aunts were there, along with a cousin I hadn't seen since my father's funeral. That cousin didn't even look at me when I sat down. The waiter poured water. I asked for just lemon. No wine. We talked weather and traffic for the first 10 minutes. Everyone avoided eye contact with me, and no one brought up the house. Until they did. One aunt leaned forward and said, just loud enough to carry, I still remember how fast the keys changed hands after the service. Never seen anyone act that fast. My head turned slowly. What? She laughed, maybe trying to soften it, maybe not. I mean, she wasn't using them anymore, right? A second of silence, then a chuckle from the other end of the table. Someone lifted their wine glass. I stared at my untouched napkin, fingers wrapped tightly around my water. The house, the one I was still fighting to get back. They weren't just casual about it, they'd celebrated it. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I let them keep talking. Bobby chimed in as the appetizers arrived. I think we can all agree emotions got high. But we have to remember, brick and wood aren't people. The house became a symbol, that's all. No one was trying to hurt you. Funny, I said, my voice even, how people who never built a home are always the ones who sell it the fastest. That got a few murmurs. My sister shifted in her seat. The cousin finally looked up from her phone. I could feel the room start to turn, not dramatically, not like a courtroom drama, but enough. A few people were now glancing at me instead of avoiding me. Then my sister smiled, sharp, like the edge of broken glass, and said, Reet's always needed to feel special. It's her whole identity, honestly, center of attention since high school. I didn't blink. And you've always needed someone to stand behind so you could look tall. The table fell silent. Even the clink of utensils stopped. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. I stood up. I looked at every face. One by one. Thank you, I said. Tonight you showed me exactly who you are. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded bill. This covers my meal, even though I didn't touch it. I turned toward the door without waiting for a response. Reet, wait, someone called behind me. But I didn't. Sometimes silence is a weapon. Other times, it's a shield. Outside, the air was cooler than expected. As I approached my car, I heard someone jog up behind me. It was Mr. Howard, my dad's friend from the church. I've stayed quiet too long, he said, catching his breath. It's time you heard what your father really wanted. I met Harold in the parking lot of a cafe just off Colorado Boulevard. The kind of place where retirees sip espresso with the patience of monks and students type like their lives depend on it. The breeze carried the smell of burnt toast and eucalyptus. And then his voice, low, gravelly, weathered like old bark, cut through it all. I should have spoken sooner, Reet. He stood with a manila folder pressed against his chest, like it might escape if he didn't hold it tight. You were the only one he ever mentioned when it came to that house. Not once did he say your sister's name in that context. He told me, clear as day, Reet gets it, no contest. I didn't interrupt. I let his words settle between us like leaves drifting to the sidewalk. I kept quiet, thinking it was a family matter. That was my mistake. He handed me the folder, and I opened it right there beside his Prius. Inside was a scanned copy of a document, a property transfer. dated 4 days after my father's funeral. The problem? He'd been dead for 6. I stared at the date, the shaky signature. Then I pulled out my phone and brought up the original tax return I'd saved, his real signature. Firm. Consistent. This one was a mockery. It was never paranoia, I murmured, more to myself than to Harold. It was fact. He nodded solemnly, patted my shoulder once, and got in his car. No long goodbyes. Just the handoff of truth that had been waiting to be spoken. When I got back to the apartment, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. From my mom's cousin, Marianne, the one who'd moved to Oregon years ago and had never taken sides in anything. I just read the blog post, her voice said. I had no idea. They told everyone you walked away, said you didn't want anything to do with the family. I'm sorry, Reet. I should have asked you directly. If you need me to say something, publicly, I will. I sat with that for a while. They hadn't just stolen a house. They'd rewritten my story. Chapter by chapter. Reet was too emotional. Reet distanced herself. Reet wasn't stable enough to handle property. Reet was a problem. I could feel each lie peeling back in real time. One by one. Word by word. And every time someone called or wrote or messaged with a, "Now I understand," it stitched something back together that I thought had unraveled for good. At some point that afternoon, a message came from my old high school teacher. I always wondered why I never saw your name in the community center volunteer logs after your father passed. Now I know it wasn't you who stepped away. Another ping, this time from someone I barely remembered, my former piano instructor. Your story, it's reaching people, Reet. Don't stop. And then the quote that looped in my head all evening as I sat on the floor, back against the couch, papers spread around me like a courtroom tableau. The truth is like sunlight. It takes time, but it finds every corner. I looked at the stack, the forgery, the time-stamped deed. Harold's note, Marianne's voicemail, now saved in 3 formats. My phone lit up. Peaches, we're ready to file. I didn't even blink. I already knew my answer. Let's burn it into the record. I walked into the courtroom just after 8:30 a.m. The air was still crisp from the night before, but inside the building, everything felt artificially sterile. Beige walls, humming fluorescents, voices kept at courtroom volume. Peaches walked beside me, her heels tapping steadily, a quiet drumbeat of readiness. I wasn't nervous, not really. The nerves had burned off weeks ago. What I carried now was something colder, more focused, like a still blade. They expected silence, I thought as I scanned the room. But I brought a sound team. My sister sat 2 rows ahead, Bobby beside her, both dressed like they thought the judge would be grading for pageantry. Their attorney looked like he walked out of a billboard ad, tailored suit, 2 white teeth, performative empathy. We took our place. The hearing wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Peaches opened with the will. Then came the letters, the receipts, the voice recordings, and finally, the video. She passed the flash drive to the clerk, who loaded it without comment. The screen came to life. My father, holding a cup of coffee, walking alongside me in the backyard. We were younger, 2 years younger, maybe more. His voice echoed through the room. One day, this will be yours. It's always been meant for you. There was a shift in the room. Audible gasps, someone's stifled cough. The judge leaned forward. Peaches turned slightly to glance at Bobby, whose face had drained of color. My sister didn't blink, but her knuckles tightened on the edge of the table, like she was holding on to what little script she had left. Then, something no one expected. A woman stood up in the back. "Excuse me, Your Honor," she said. The judge raised a brow. "You are?" "Evelyn Mendez, neighbor to Mr. Jurvetson for 12 years. I wasn't called as a witness, but I'd like to speak if allowed." The judge gave a slow nod. "Proceed." Briefly, she stepped forward, hands clasped, voice steady. "Mr. Jurvetson told me at least 6 times that he was leaving the house to Reet. He said the others would just sell it off. He didn't trust anyone else to preserve it. That was it. Simple, but seismic. Bobby's attorney tried to object, mumbling something about spontaneous testimony and hearsay, but the judge waved him off. "We have substantial reason to believe the will was bypassed through fraud," he said. Then he looked directly at my sister. "And there's growing evidence of coordinated manipulation of property documentation. This court is issuing a restraining order against the sale or modification of the property until full civil review and audit are complete." I didn't smile. There was no fist pump moment. I just exhaled, because that wasn't victory, that was recognition. As we stepped outside into the blinding Los Angeles light, Peaches touched my elbow gently. "You did good," she said. "You didn't flinch." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Halfway to the parking garage, my phone buzzed. A text, from her. Just one word. "Why?" I stared at it. Then I typed, "Because he asked me not to let them rewrite this." And I hit send. She knocked just after 4. No text, no call, just the sound of knuckles against my front door like nothing had burned between us. I didn't answer right away. I stood behind the door, watching her distorted silhouette through the frosted glass, breathing slow and quiet like I was waiting for a storm to pass. But it didn't. It just stood there. When I finally opened the door, she didn't speak. Not at first. She looked thinner, less polished than usual. Her makeup was minimal, like she wanted to appear soft, but the hardness around her eyes gave her away. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat across from each other in the living room, her on the edge of the couch, me in the armchair my father used to call his spot when he visited. The room felt smaller with her in it, like the years between us had settled into the walls and were now watching us wait. She folded her hands. "None of this needed to go public." I blinked. It didn't go public. It went truthful. We could have worked it out. I tilted my head. "No, you didn't want to work it out. You wanted me to disappear quietly." She winced but didn't deny it. "I didn't know Bobby forged anything," she said. "I never said he did it alone." Her voice caught. "I wasn't trying to take something from you." "You weren't trying to give anything either." We sat in that thick, awful silence. Her eyes welled up, but mine didn't. Not anymore. "You already lost the house," I said, voice calm. "What you're scared of is losing your version of the story." She covered her face with her hands. I stood, walked to the hallway drawer, and returned with something I had saved for this exact moment. A photograph of Dad and me in the garden, both smiling, dirt on our gloves, pride in his eyes. I'd written something on the back in neat penmanship. This was the day he chose me. I handed it to her. She stared at it for a long time. "I'm not going to keep fighting you," I said. "But I'm not following you anymore either. You can't lead me somewhere you were never willing to go yourself." She said nothing, just nodded, lips pressed into a line. When she left, I didn't walk her to the door. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and went for a walk. No destination, just motion. The streets around my neighborhood held echoes of another life. Chalk drawings on sidewalks, Dad's car parked in the shade, the little red wagon I used to drag behind me on grocery runs. Those things were gone, but not erased. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across lawns and fences. I ended up at the park near our old school. The bench under the big oak was still there. I sat, exhaled, and let the weight roll off my shoulders. Letting go doesn't come with a celebration. It comes with silence, with space, with the realization that even when you lose people, you can still reclaim yourself. Sometimes you have to forget what you feel and remember what you deserve. As the sky turned lavender, my phone rang. "Peaches." "Just checking in," she said. "Everything's moving forward as expected. No more surprises." "Good." "You're on solid ground now, Reed." I closed my eyes and nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I know." I walked home slowly, and by the time I got back, the porch light had clicked on. There was an email notification waiting for me. Subject line, "The Woman Who Fought Quietly." The community article had been republished, this time on a national human interest site. I didn't click the link, not yet, because I knew what it said. I lived it. The ruling came down just after 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. I sat in the second row of the courtroom, hands folded in my lap, listening as the judge read through the conclusion like it was just another item on a bureaucratic checklist. Fraudulent deed nullified. Property rights reinstated. Civil penalties imposed on both my sister and Bobby. Court records sealed in my favor. There was no dramatic gasp, no confetti of vindication, only quiet. When we walked out, Peaches leaned over and said, "You won. Smile, Reet." But I didn't. Because this wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about truth being louder than a signature. 3 days later, I signed the house over to a transitional housing nonprofit. Single mothers, women starting over, women who'd been told by their own families they were too much or too little. I sat with their board director in a sunlit room and passed the signed deed across the table. "If it only served me," I said, "it would still be their house. Now it belongs to something bigger." The director looked stunned. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." My inbox started to fill before the ink dried. The local news picked up the story. Then the local turned national. Estranged daughter wins legal battle, gives home away to women rebuilding their lives. The comments poured in. Some praised me like a saint. Some questioned my sanity. But none of that mattered. My sister sent one final email. "I hope you're happy." I didn't read the rest. I just deleted it. No rage, no thrill, just closure. A week later, I visited my father's grave for the first time since the verdict. I brought nothing. Just stood there in my sneakers and denim jacket, hands in my pockets, and there it was. A new line etched below his name, his dates, his old Marine Corps insignia. The only one who kept coming back. I hadn't asked for it. Peaches had done it, quietly, respectfully, using the funds from the court's restitution order. No fanfare, just truth, permanent, carved, and impossible to revise. I didn't cry. I didn't touch the stone. I just whispered, "I kept my promise, Dad." Then I turned and walked away. Not with regret, but with release. No looking back. I spent the next few weeks finishing projects I had let fall behind. Cleaning the apartment. Donating books. Sorting files. Living. Then one morning, a package arrived on my doorstep. No return address. Just a small brown box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a photo album. On the cover, embossed in simple gold letters, "The House That Raised Me." I opened it carefully. Pages of photos. Children playing in the yard. A woman with 2 toddlers painting a wall together. A teenager fixing the mailbox with duct tape and pride. The porch swing now holding a family of 4, smiling. I pressed my palm gently against the page. I didn't lose a home, I made one, just not for myself.